I have the privilege and the task of really kicking off this conversation and charged with the task of really presenting an overview of how biotechnology may have the potential to disrupt the food chain. And I just want to start off by asking, how many of you are meat eaters? Okay, fair bit. How many of you are vegetarians? How many of you are vegans? Wow, one vegan. Are we no longer in Northern California? One vegan. How many of you have had a plant-based meat substitute? Okay, good. And how many are thinking about it? Okay, well, I think one of the steps toward behavior change is to be educated, and I think, like you, I'm really looking forward to being educated by the pioneers and the entrepreneurs on our panel and in the audience tonight. So delighted to be here. I am a partner at Physic Ventures, and we are a venture firm based here in San Francisco, investing at the intersection of health and sustainability. And I'm particularly interested in where life science converges with health, with nutrition, and with consumer products. So to get the conversation started, we are going to talk about a global problem that we have on the demand for animal products. And what this is, it may be hard to see in the back, but this is a snapshot of global meat consumption on a per capita basis in 2009. In the last year, 300 million tons of meat have been consumed globally. And by 2015, our global population will likely reach 9 billion people, and that number of tons of meat will likely double. This largely is driven by increasingly growing economies like China and India, and as their populations become wealthier and acquire greater wealth and the desire to eat meat, the diet and the shift toward meat really demands a greater production of meat. What is the impact of more meat eaters on our planet? Well, it's bad news for the planet for a number of different reasons. The meat production industry is inefficient, and it taxes our environment in a lot of different ways. We have the need for land to raise livestock. We have land for growing feed, and 2/3 of the land that's used to grow products is actually used to grow for animals. Only about 8% of the land that grows products goes to feeding humans. Livestock are responsible for producing about 18% of global greenhouse gases, and there's additional resources such as water used to maintain the livestock. So I'm going to submit to you that any solution, and we'll talk about a number of different solutions today, will need to be sustainable in that they address both the health and the environmental impact of this global problem that we have. Less land, less water, less carbon emissions, potentially a better health profile, and an opportunity to address important public health issues. So we're going to hear from some pioneers that are developing a range of solutions and really going after and attacking a very important problem and disrupting the mainstream of our food production process. I want to tell you that all of the folks sitting here believe that the food industry is broken and it needs innovation, and biotechnology is one potential way to do that. This isn't the first time that biotech has innovated in broken industries, and we can look at medicine and look at how antibody engineering and how molecular biology have really changed the way that we characterize diseases and how antibody therapeutics have treated particular diseases. We can turn to the chemicals industry and look at how sustainable solutions and processes for producing bio-based materials, bio-based chemicals and fuels are offering renewable sources of energy. We can talk about how plant-based actives are providing cleaner and more active consumer products. And we can talk about how biotechnology platforms for precision farming are enabling better yield, fewer needs for water, and less harmful pesticides. And then today's topic is really to talk about how biotech has the potential to enable new ways to meet the global demand for protein. So it's really with this convergence of food and technology that we're talking about. And sometimes this combination of food and technology can be puzzling. Sometimes it's controversial. And I want to tell you that here, particularly in the Valley, there's been a lot of innovation in food and technology, largely driven by digital technologies. I won't dwell on this, but I want to tell you that innovation has happened in how we procure food, how we shop for food, how we search for recipes, e-commerce solutions, the channels in which food appears. And of course, molecular biology and biotech have enabled breakthrough ways of detecting and tracing food safety and stability issues. Molecular biology has also enabled personalized nutrition recommendations through genetics and insights in the microbiome. And finally, as we'll talk about more today, biotech is enabling new functional ingredients and processes for enabling global nutrition and health. So as we explore whether biotechnology can really save food, we're going to examine the technical issues, the business issues, the commercialization issues, and the financing and capital needs of these solutions. Will they scale? Will consumers adopt? Is there a market, and what does that market look like? Does the market sit here in Northern California, or is it a global opportunity? What's the investor appetite for these particular solutions? We'll talk about this with our panel of passionate pioneers and entrepreneurs and investors that we have with us today, and that we're fortunate to have. We really have a range of perspectives, starting with pre-Series A companies all the way to public companies that have pioneered their technology across many sectors, including the food sector. As we look across the solutions, we're seeing plant-based alternatives. Some of you may have had an opportunity to sample the insect-based protein products. We're seeing nut-based products. And of course, the alternative way of producing meat that you'll hear more about in just a moment via lab-based production of meat. Before we turn it over really to the panel and to Andres's presentation, I want to give you in a window really, or some insight into the landscape that these entrepreneurs face in really pioneering their innovations to meet this global demand for disrupting the animal-based products in our food chain. The drivers of this innovation start with the fact that we're really starting to think about the impact of food on our bodies and our health. We have obviously a very significant rise in diabetes and obesity, and a number of diseases are actually treated and can be prevented by eating healthily. We've talked a lot already about the global demand for meat and the impact that that has on our environment and depleting resources, as well as the ethical issues and the issues of animal welfare and the opportunity to really reduce that. The entrepreneurs will face challenges that start in an industry that has lagged the opportunity to innovate and is slow to adopt new innovations. They face scale-up challenges of bringing technologies into a commercial market that has an opportunity to scale all the way across the globe. The food industry has a complex supply chain, and for that reason, the business models are not always clear. The fact that we as consumers take a lot of different considerations into a purchasing decision, and we don't always take all of these different considerations into account. These are costly companies, and the need to raise capital is on all of their minds, I can tell you, and we'll talk a little bit about what the environment looks like to do that and to scale a business. I want to pose a question that I think we'll come back to, and it starts with the fact that food is really personal. What we put on our plate, what we put in our bodies, what we choose to feed our families, and traditionally this purchasing decision about what we eat has been driven by convenience, cost, and taste. And the question that I want to pose is whether we are on the cusp of a cultural shift in new considerations entering into that purchasing decision and what we decide to eat. Things such as health and our values and our social responsibility about the impact of food on the planet, and the transparency with which companies that produce food communicate with us. And I think that that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more. Very quickly, I want to encourage you that the investor environment is looking a bit rosier. I won't go through the numbers other than to say that in 2013, in the food products specifically space, investors provided just under $50 million to private companies in this space. And as many of you know, just yesterday, a company that is hoping to disrupt the egg industry raised $23 million from very prominent investors. So to really frame this, investor appetite is increasing. Some very prominent names are bullish on this space, starting with prominent investors here in the Valley, Coastal Ventures, Kleiner Perkins, and prominent angel investors like Bill Gates and founders of Twitter and Yahoo. So the opportunity is looking good. And we'll talk a little bit more about the financing environment and where the appetite is today. So if I haven't convinced you that we have a global problem, maybe you'll take it from Bill Gates, who published on his blog an important report on the future of food that I think frames these issues quite nicely. And Kurt is going to help me bring up this video, which I think will be a nice segue into Andrus's presentation.
We all need protein. Most of us get it from meat. But animals aren't the most efficient way to get it. Producing 1 kilogram of beef requires 150 square meters of land and 15,000 liters of water, most of which is used to grow feed for the animal. And producing that same kilogram of beef generates 27 kilograms of CO2. That's the equivalent of driving your car more than 100 miles. Tasty? Yes. Sustainable? No. But through years of research and testing, food scientists have perfected the process for turning plants into foods that deliver the same taste, texture, and protein of meat. These plant-based proteins are better for the environment. Producing them requires less land, uses less water, and produces far less CO2. And it's faster. Going from veggie fiber, grains, oils, and spices to veggie chicken takes about 30 seconds. The most exciting part? So far, we've only explored about 8% of the world's plant proteins as potential meat alternatives. And in a world where we all need protein, remaking meat is one sector of the food industry that is ripe for innovation and growth.
Great, so with that, I am going to introduce to you Andrus Forgax, who is the CEO and founder of Modern Meadow, one of the pioneers in the meat replacement and alternative meat production and animal products business.
Thank you very much, Stacy. So it's great to be here. Thank you. And thank you, Stacy, for that terrific overview. I think it's very important for us to all understand what the scale of the challenges ahead of us, and to understand why it's so important that we have the diversity of solutions that are represented on this panel. So I'm with Modern Meadow. And with Modern Meadow, we're a life sciences, material sciences company. So our focus is on developing fundamentally new ways of growing animal products. And our heritage comes from tissue engineering. The first company I founded, it was a company called Organovo, which is based in San Diego. And Organovo pioneered the 3D printing of human tissue for medical applications. So what Organovo's technology allows us to do is we can 3D print little body parts, little blood vessels, lung tissue, liver tissue, skin, et cetera, that in the fullness of time, we hope to have, our goal is to have therapeutic applications. So eventually we can pursue replacement therapy and surgical applications. But in the near term, what Organovo is doing is it's providing these tissues to drug companies so that they can test and develop drugs faster. This way they can test and develop drugs on human tissues that are three-dimensional, fully biological, rather than on animal models or on two-dimensional human cells that just float in a petri dish. And this tremendously accelerates drug testing and drug development. And today, Organovo is a public company. It has a team of 50 people, and it's just made terrific progress over the course of the last 7 years. So we thought to ourselves, well, gosh, if we can make medical-grade human tissues that are good enough to test and develop new drugs, that are good enough to pursue therapeutic applications, what else can we do with this kind of technology? And we've been constantly approached by people asking, well, if you can grow skin, can you make leather? If you can grow muscle, can you make meat? And for the longest time, we dismissed these ideas because we were very much focused on human medical applications. But then I kind of started thinking about this, and I realized that those applications outside of medicine could be tremendously impactful as well. And so we started a separate company, Modern Meadow, 2 years ago, to pursue applications for tissue engineering, biofabrication, outside of medicine. And our focus specifically is to develop new ways of growing leather and meat that is fully biological, real, genuine leather, real, genuine meat, without killing animals and without harming the environment in quite the same way as livestock production does. And our goal is not to just go after mimicry, biomimicry. We're also looking at ways of making materials and products that are better. So in the case of meat, we can make products that have a better nutritional profile, that have better form factors. In the case of leather, we're making types of leather that have better aesthetic and performance qualities that are important to manufacturers. So why is this important? Well, Stacy gave a very, very good overview of this. So I'm just going to go after the highlights. You've heard from Stacy that today we have 7 billion people on the planet. This is expected to grow to over 9 billion by 2050. And the 60 billion animals that we maintain on land today, that we farm on land today, is expected to double by 2050. So how do we double the livestock industry when already today it consumes, or it occupies 1/3 of all available land directly through grazing or indirectly through the feed crop production, when it's also the leading user of fresh water on the planet, and it is the leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So the UN, Food and Agriculture Organization, estimates that this is 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Some estimates place this as high as 51%. That's a number that's been quoted by the World Bank and also by Bill Gates. Regardless of what you believe, whether it's 18% or 51%, the livestock industry is ahead of almost every other sector in greenhouse gas emissions. So how do you double this? How do you double these numbers without moving to another planet? And that's the challenge that we have to address. So what can we do? Well, we have 3 fundamental options. One is we can curb demand. So while demand is expected to double over the course of the next 30 years, we can put in place a whole bunch of demand management solutions, encourage people to go vegetarian, vegan, adopt flexitarian diets, and that certainly is very important. But I would say that the challenge there is it's a global behavioral change challenge. While it's possible to have people moderate their meat consumption, and certainly there's been some of that in the United States and Europe, in many parts of the world in emerging markets, meat consumption is growing tremendously, and it's very hard to implement the kind of the demand management that can really offset this. So demand management is certainly one important aspect, but it's not going to be a total solution. What else can we do? Well, we can farm animals as we have for the last 10,000 years, but we can try to implement better technologies to mitigate the environmental effects of this. And that's very important, and there's been a lot of innovation in that. But the challenge here is that agriculture is a fairly mature industry. Animal farming is a 10,000-year-old technology. And although there's been a lot of innovation, if you think about it, fundamentally, the way we raise a cow today is not altogether that different than the way we did it 50 years ago. So there's a lot of things we can do here, but it's incremental. So what else can we do? Well, we can come up with better supply-side solutions. There's a lot of innovation that's happening here, and there's a lot of innovation that's needed here. What we do at Modern Meadow is one such supply-side solution. We develop animal protein-based alternatives. And you're going to hear from Beyond Meat. They're developing plant-based alternatives as well. And there's many other companies that are working on plant-based solutions or insect-based solutions or other protein-based solutions. And you've certainly, no doubt, heard about innovations happening in soy, seitan, tempeh, tofu. If you walk into a supermarket today, you would see a large aisle dedicated to meat alternatives. And that's a category of food product that has not been, that would not be the same size if you'd gone into the supermarket 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, that's an aisle that's grown tremendously in size. It's been one of the fastest growing categories in the supermarket. So our insight at Modern Meadow is that we focus on creating animal products, but without having to raise the entire animal. Because at the end of the day, animal products are made of simple tissues. And instead of raising an entire complex animal, an entire complex sentient living animal, why don't we just start with what the tissues themselves are made of? The basic unit of life, which is the cell. And so that's what we focus on at Modern Meadow. This is not a new idea. This is an idea that actually has an 80-year history. Actually, probably even longer than that. Churchill famously wrote about it in the 1930s, where he said that in 50 years' time, this is what he predicted in 1932, in 50 years' time, there should be a fundamentally better way to grow animal products, because if you think about it, the way we farm our animals is an absurdity. Now, Churchill was very, very prescient in a lot of things, and I think he was right in this as well. He was just off on the time frame. It took a few more decades for medical science to catch up with his vision. Now, there's been a lot of innovation. There's been a lot of innovation in tissue engineering over the last 20 years. I'm not going to talk about this just for a second, but there's been a lot of innovation in tissue engineering over the last 20 years that has allowed us to catch up with Churchill's vision. If you've heard about doctors growing things like ears or windpipes or bone or skin grafts that have been successfully implanted into patients, that's been a field of medicine called regenerative medicine or tissue engineering. And it is on the back of that field in medical science that there's been also tremendous innovation in culturing of meat. Now, 2 years ago, my father, who's my co-founder both in Organovo and in Modern Meadow, he got up on the stage at TED Med in 2011, and he initially gave a talk about growing of organs for medical applications. And then a few hours later, he was invited back up on stage for an unusual little demonstration. He took out a little piece of cultured pork chop that had been grown without killing a pig, and he cooked it on stage, salted and peppered it, and ate it in front of the audience. And it was right before lunchtime, so it caused quite a bit of sensation. And I am happy to say that he's still alive and well. And then last summer, Mark Post, who is a researcher based out of the Netherlands, working at the University of Maastricht, also unveiled a hamburger that he grew in a lab without having to kill a cow. That was sponsored by Sergey Brin, that received a lot of media attention. So there's been a lot of development in this field of growing animal products without necessarily having to kill animals. And I'm happy to say that it's a very collaborative field. So we're in good relations with Dr. Post, and we're excited about the progress we're able to make in this field. Now, the benefit of this approach of culturing meat versus slaughtering meat is very significant. This is a study out of Oxford from a few years back that looked at the process of growing meat. culturing meat or brewing meat rather than slaughtering meat, and it found that the process of doing that would be 99% more efficient in terms of land use, 96% more efficient in terms of water use, 96% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and about half as much energy. And this is very, very compelling. This also suggests that from a top-down standpoint, there's significant scale economies that come from this kind of technology. Now, the process that we've developed, we're developing all kinds of recipes for growing meat. And one of the processes that we've developed recently, and I'm very excited to share this, you're actually one of the first audiences that I'm going to share this with. We've developed a new way of growing meat, which allows us to make a product that actually has more of a snack food form factor. Because if you grow meat, you can actually control its composition from the ground up, and you don't have to be limited to the traditional expectations of what meat should look like or how it should taste like. So we've developed a snack food concept. And the way we do this is we take cells from an animal. This could be a cow, it could be a lamb, an ostrich, a kangaroo, a crocodile, what have you. Importantly, you don't harm the animal. You're just taking a biopsy of its muscle. And then you take the millions of cells that you obtain from the biopsy, you isolate the muscle cells, and you proliferate them into billions and billions of cells using cell culture techniques. And then we take the muscle that we've expanded in cell culture, we add to it some pectin. Pectin is the fruit sugar that's used to congeal jam. And we also add to it some spice, some seasoning, and a little bit of calcium. And we found that the spice combination that works best for us in this recipe is the teriyaki flavor. And then we cook it in a food dehydrator for 19 hours at 160 degrees Celsius. And what we end up with is something that doesn't require animals getting killed. It has very little harm, no harm to the environment. It is a pure protein product with pure vitamins and protein with no fat, because the mouthfeel of the fat is created by the pectin. And it is very shelf-stable and it is food safe, because not only is it basically a pharmaceutical-grade process that's used to make the meat itself, but then you cook it in a food dehydrator for 19 hours. So it is safe upon safe. And the product that we've come up with looks like this. It actually kind of looks like kettle chips. We call it, we still need to come up with a good name for it, but we call it steak chips. Cultured steak chips. And we actually unveiled this in a private tasting for the first time 2 weeks ago at Google's Solve for X event. So we fed it to 50 people, including Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Vinod Khosla, Mark Andreessen, a whole bunch of other people. And to my knowledge, they're still alive and well, because the NASDAQ has not tumbled yet. So, but what's great about this is it's a crunchy, really good tasting snack food product that is actually healthy and doesn't require killing animals. So what's nice about this is it opens up the design space. We can create different kinds of food products and different kinds of materials that actually exceed what our traditional expectations might be. But as a company, while we're developing food, our near-term commercial focus is actually not on food. It's leather. And the reason behind that is several-fold. One is leather is technically simpler. It is made mainly of one cell type, and it is a two-dimensional material. It is also less polarizing from a consumer and a regulatory standpoint, so we don't have to go through an FDA approval process. And we found, at least, that more people are willing to try new experimental materials to wear than they are willing to try new experimental materials to eat. And so for us, leather is a good place to start with this new kind of technology. It's a way to demystify this technology. And also from an economic standpoint, leather has a higher value density. We can introduce a very high grade, very high quality of leather in some special luxury fashion applications, and then expand from there as we're able to scale the technology. So the process for making leather using cell culture techniques is very similar. Again, you start with an animal. At this time, you take a biopsy of its skin. You don't harm the animal in the process. And again, you can work with any kind of animal you want to make leather from. And you isolate the skin cells from the biopsy. You expand the cells to produce millions and millions, billions and billions of cells. And then it's about growing sheets. Because leather fundamentally is made of collagen. So you need to get these skin cells to grow in such a way that they become confluent. And when they become confluent, when they touch one another, they know what to do in nature. They start producing collagen. And that collagen is the fundamental building block of skin, and it's also the main kind of ingredient in leather. And effectively, what you see both in our meat production and in our leather production is that we recapitulate nature. We basically get cells to do what they would do in nature. It's not about doing something unnatural. We work with very natural cells. We don't modify their DNA, and we get them to grow as they would in nature. And again, so once they've produced collagen, then we take these sheets of skin with the collagen, and we can layer them together in such a way that the collagen fiber network not only grows in 2 dimensions, but also can grow to confluence in 3 dimensions. So we can get an isometric leather with thickness, where we can actually control the thickness of the material. And then we take it through a tanning process, but a tanning process that's shorter and less toxic than traditional leather tanning would be. Why? Because we don't need to remove hair, flesh, or fat from the hide. And those are some of the more toxic steps in the tanning process. Those are steps that are called beam house operations. And also, when we actually do tan it with tanning agents, whether they're mineral or vegetable tanning agents, we can use much lower concentrations of chemicals because this material is so much more pure. So it doesn't have the imperfections to work through. And then we can make very fancy luxury products. Now, that's not us making it. That's our partners making it. So I actually should say I have some leather samples with me. Let me take some of these out. And I'm happy to show this to you. So you can see we can create leather like this. And it smells like real leather. It feels like leather. And we're working on ways to actually enhance the handle of it, to enhance the properties of it, so we can control properties like durability and elasticity and breathability. But we can also make leather that is different than traditional leather. Just like with food, we can create completely new properties. With leather, we can create leather that has translucency, where we can actually make leather that's thinner, or leather that has physical properties that, in important design and performance ways, exceeds the properties of traditional leather. So we're not bound to be perfectly biomimetic. And that's very exciting from a design standpoint. So how do we think of ourselves as a company? Well, we think of ourselves as essentially creating a new industry, because we're not really a typical medical biotech company. On the one hand, we're an advanced material textile company. And you'll see companies up in that category that are no doubt familiar to you: 3M, Dow, DuPont, Gore. But many of these companies make their materials out of polymer chemistry, out of hydrocarbons. And we don't work with polymer chemistry. We don't work with oil products. Instead, we work with living materials. So perhaps we're a bit like an agricultural biotech company. And again, in that category, you'll see names that are familiar to you: Syngenta, Bunge, Monsanto, Cargill. But again, in that category, most of the innovation and the technology in that category has to do with plant science and fertilizers and pesticides and genetic modification or selective breeding of plants. And again, we don't traffic in that. We don't deal in genetic modification, and we also don't focus on plants. We focus on animal products. And then an aspect of what we do has to do with the consumer experience. So we will also be working with food companies as well as leather goods companies. But essentially, we're at the intersection of these very large industries. And importantly, while we're developing both meat and leather, we're focused on leather in the near term, and the applications that we're going after are the ones that have the highest value density. So we're focused on applications where a little bit of leather can be used in a very high-value way, like leather, high-end luxury fashion accessories, and then apparel, and then eventually upholstery, furniture, and then transportation in automotive and aviation. And what's been interesting is that we've gotten a lot of interest from partners. And right now, we're in the enviable position of really picking and choosing in every single product category who our alpha partners are that we will launch with initially. So what does this mean for the future of animal products? Well, this is currently the state of the art. This is actually a very well-functioning slaughterhouse. But I guarantee you that if you were to visit this slaughterhouse and see how the animals get processed and, and dismembered, you would probably not maintain your appetite. And you'd probably want to go, at least for the day, if not longer, vegetarian or vegan. And by contrast, the future of animal products could be more like this. This is actually a brewery. And if you think about it, we've been brewing in food. We've been brewing cells. We've been culturing cells for a long, long time. We've been doing it in products like beer and yogurt and cheese and bread. We've had a long history of brewing with cells like yeast and lactobacillus. So what we're really proposing here is nothing so fundamentally dramatic. It's basically just brewing or culturing with a different type of cell. In this case, it's a mammalian cell. But what that allows us to do is it allows us to produce leather and meat in an environment that functions much more like a brewery. And as such, it can be much more transparent than a slaughterhouse. It can actually operate in an urban center. It could be open to the public. And eventually, in the future, people can come visit and see the entire process from beginning to end, understand how it operates, and then partake of the product afterwards. So that really is our vision, urban production. And as a company, we're actually opening up a larger research lab and pilot production facility in Brooklyn, New York. So in about half a year's time, should any of you be in Brooklyn at that point in time, we encourage you to come visit us and learn about the process of brewing and culturing leather and meat. Now, I should say, Stacy described our process as lab-grown, and that is true. We do operate a lab. But almost every single processed food that you eat, from an Oreo cookie to a Triscuit, has been made in a lab, technically. So in that sense, we're no more lab-grown than almost anything else that you've eaten or anything that's been harvested. And in fact, if you think about it, your kitchen is a laboratory of sorts, right? You're mixing together ingredients and heating them up and cooling them. And in that sense, what we do is no more labby or artificial than anything else that might be grown or produced in your kitchen. And in fact, it's a much more pure process. So with that, thank you very much.
That's great. So we're going to bring up both the Twitter handle and the text number. And I invite you all throughout the discussion to text us with questions. I'm going to jump right in and actually not go down the panel and have people make introductions. You have their bios. I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves by way of questions. And the first question I want to ask is to Brent Taylor, who's a co-founder of Beyond Meat. And we're delighted to have him here. And unfortunately, Ethan couldn't be with us. He's come down with the flu, so we wish him well. But welcome, welcome you.
Thanks, Sid.
And I want to start with a question that really looks at this idea of category creation. So Andres talked about creating a new category that has applications in a number of different sectors. And Beyond Meat is doing something similar, but in a different way. You're navigating through the soy market and really looking at sort of the perfect substitute, the perfect replicate of meat. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about why you've chosen that path and where it's taken you from both a technology and a business perspective.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you guys that you outlined all the great facts. So it's really fantastic. And so, yeah, Beyond Meat as a company, we're a producer and marketer of meat products entirely made from plant-based inputs. And so, in theory, we essentially use a very familiar cooking procedure widely used within the food sector. It's called extrusion cooking. And we're essentially taking all plant-based ingredients, plant protein, plant fiber, and a form of plant oil to make both chicken and beef products with the texture, appearance, and performance of real chicken and beef. And so us as a company, ultimately we're not using a cooking platform that is necessarily new to the food industry. The monks in Asia had been making meat substitutes since the early 20th century, if not before. So it's nothing novel necessarily, but we're doing it in a way that is very distinct, and this was really discovered over a path of 15 years with our university partner. So I think that's what attracted us to this particular cooking technology was its level of familiarity in the sector and its level of scalability as well.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. So we'll come back to Beyond Meat and this part of the market. But I want to bring Ken Ploss into the discussion. He leads the nutrition group at Solazyme. And what I find really exciting and striking about the similarities between what we heard from modern Meadow and Solazyme is really the notion that we have an enabling technology, a platform technology that has applications in a number of different sectors. And you've heard Andres talk about pursuing leather goods and pursuing really novel ways of producing meat with very attractive qualities. Solazyme has a platform technology to create specialty oils from algae, and they have deployed that in a number of different sectors. And I wonder if you could just give us kind of the path that the company has walked to get to the nutrition space, and what are some of the qualities of the technology that have gotten you there?
Sure. Thanks again for the group for organizing it. We really appreciate it. We're excited to share the technology. So we use algae, microalgae, single-celled organisms. They're actually the predecessor for most plant life. And they've got incredible diversity. So inside is literally thousands of different plants, and depending on which cell you pick, what you feed it, and how you treat it, you can get a variety of different foods, proteins, lipids, micronutrients, polysaccharides. It's literally a complete whole food inside this cell, a whole food system. It's got everything you need in one little microorganism. So what we do is we take that, and we take what the world makes really well, carbohydrates, and we use those microalgae as a generator to create higher order foods, oils and proteins. And today, as we're commercializing the market, we're starting with 3 core ingredients. The first are whole food ingredients. So this is algae. This is nothing added, nothing removed. Taken through our fermentation process, just like Andrew showed. We use fermentation tanks. And literally 5 days after you put the seed culture into the tank, you get a product that can be 65% protein, one of the highest percentages of protein within the plant market. Most plant proteins are around 15 to 30%, so you're getting to 65% cell mass of protein. Or a product that's 50% lipid, 20% fiber, and a whole bunch of micronutrients and vitamins. Or you can go to the other extreme, and in this case, we've asked the cell to produce as much oil as possible. And what's interesting is this particular oil is one of the most healthy and the most stable in the world. It's got less than 3% polyunsaturates, typically around 1% polyunsaturates. That's the cause of most oxidation. And there's actually no oil available in the world with that low polyunsaturates. It's got 90% monounsaturates. That's extremely high. And so you've got an incredibly healthy oil that's incredibly stable. And these are all produced by algae from nature. They've been sitting there for a long time, and what biotechnology's done is allowed us to actually leverage that to use those algae and create these types of different products. So that's just a quick overview of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. So I want to, by way of introduction, welcome Rob Leclerc into the conversation, and he is the founder of an investment platform called AgFunder. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the platform itself, and then maybe draw in some insights about what's changed. Why does it feel like we're cresting in this part of the market with the intersection of agriculture and technology and food and technology, and how you factor that into the companies that you profile on the platform?
Sure. Okay, I'm on. So AgFunder is effectively a crowdfunding platform for the global agriculture space. So we touch on ag tech, ag biotech, and very traditional agriculture as well. In particular, we do work with individual investors and institutional investors, so we're a little bit like crowdfunding 2.0 because we're really filling out a big investment gap in the agriculture space. It's not like in Silicon Valley where you can sort of pick up your farm or your ag tech company and bring it over here. Oftentimes you're in North Carolina or you're in Michigan or you're in Africa or you're in Brazil. And so we basically developed a platform based on our own pain points of having an ag startup and dealing with the pains of raising capital for this. And our real goal with this is to bring the financial infrastructure to the ecosystem so that companies like these guys can do the great work that they're doing. Because if we don't have sufficient availability of capital in this space, everyone will suffer. And so this is our way of trying to solve the problem in the food system. So specifically, though, dealing with some of the culture and some of the movement, we are seeing a huge new groundswell of interest in agriculture. And some of this is coming out, I think a lot of Silicon Valley interest actually is bringing greater awareness to what's going on. And there's some leaders in this space. Khosla Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, I think, are quite involved. Horizon Ventures, which is Li Ka-shing's investment platform, have invested in some agriculture companies. And the VCs, the sort of the smart money in the valley right now, are looking at agriculture as a big ancient industry that is massively ripe for disruption. They see a broken system, and they want to start to apply the Silicon Valley solution and try to engineer a solution in the agriculture space for basically a better solution here. So I think it's some of the leaders in the space that are really heading the charge. And there was, I don't know if you guys heard about a company called Climate Corp. They were an ag tech company that came out of Silicon Valley. Was started by some guys who did Google data analytics at Google. This was recently bought by Monsanto for about $1 billion. And this event, I think, was quite important because there's been a lot of VCs that are kind of looking at it, and now all of a sudden they're saying, okay, what's with this food tech thing? What's with this ag tech thing? And it's nice because this is now bringing liquidity in the market. I attended I spoke on a panel at Clean Tech on Friday, and they've been tracking ag and food tech venture deals, and I think they said there was 51 deals last year at $250 million, and that's sort of grown sort of $50 million every year for the last 3 or 4 years. So there's a huge new groundswell. As well, I think the other side of this is once you have these smaller companies that are now able to use social media to get to the market and connect with investors, it doesn't have to be the Crafts of the world or these other big companies to do the innovation. And in fact, I think consumers may be more suspicious of those companies. And if you have a transparent startup that says, look, we want to change the world, we don't have all of these resources, and we don't have a huge agenda, this huge corporate agenda, and there's not a lot of distrust built into it, I think there's a real opportunity for these companies. Obviously, we see companies like Whole Foods, which is having massive growth. The organics market is I think, going to be about $30 billion this year, so definitely being driven by the consumer. So we're seeing lots of new investment interest in this space, and I think it's just there's a confluence of factors, but it's I think social media, great new exciting companies. These solutions are coming out at a timely place. Crowdfunding for I'm sorry, I forget the name of it. It's Soylent, and people are starting to get excited about it, and it's sort of that groundswell of interest.
Great, thank you. So that's actually a good segue into the commercial vision of some of these companies. And there's a lot of novel categories that are moving into the market. Just today, there was an announcement that the Girl Scouts actually released a gluten-free cookie that they're going to start selling. So we have gluten-free, we have the local movement, we have natural, we have organic, and soy-free. Now we have a lot of plant-based animal products. And many of these companies would be very happy to land on the shelves of Whole Foods, and they've arrived. And what I'm interested in is, what are the big visions that you are building, and where does it end, and how do you get from A to B? So I'm going to start with you, Brent.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah,
with
so
Beyond Meat.
as a company, our commercial vision is really to be America's next great meat company, if not the world's next great meat company. We utilize a very simple and elegant platform to make meat that really delivers the same sensory experience as the meat that you enjoy. And we as a company really do embrace meat. I eat meat myself. But we know that there's half Americans out there that are rapidly reducing their meat consumption. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a 0 to 60 move, but it could be a gradual move and one to complement the diet. And so we've seen a lot of the retailers, both in Whole Foods and even conventional grocers, that are really starting to see the pressures within animal protein, whether it be feed prices, drought, et cetera. And so our big vision as a company is to ultimately go into the grocery store and not necessarily walk into the meat section, but really think about it as protein. Americans are thinking a lot more about the protein consumption. Look at the growth of the Greek yogurt category. It's really gone from 0 to hero from 2007 to today to probably 35% market share. People are very, very price and income elastic around protein. And we as Americans didn't even eat chicken before the 1930s. So really, we're very optimistic about what the future is as a company.
So Andres, I want to share the same question with you around the commercial vision, but also ask you, since you're a little bit earlier into this part of the industry, what are some of the hurdles that you face and that you've had to navigate? If you could walk us through that.
So we are a development stage company, and we are a seed stage company in terms of financing. So we just closed our seed round, which I'm happy to say was massively oversubscribed, so it went well. But we're still much earlier than a lot of the companies here on the panel. So that said, there's more scientific development that's needed to get our products fully to market. So we're happy that people have tasted it, and they've had very positive feedback. We're happy that our leather has been already unveiled last summer at TED Global, and that we're already in collaboration with some of the leading brands in the world. But we've got a way to go to develop products. Our vision commercially is a bit broader than just food. We're looking to become an animal product company, right? A company that makes a range of animal products, starting with leather and also including meat, but in a way that's better and in a way that doesn't harm animals or the environment. So that's our vision, and it's very much a global vision. We are partnering already globally to pursue our research, to pursue our product development, and I think for us it's very important that people gain comfort with our technology through products, through durable goods, leather goods. And both for leather and for meat, we start initially at the high end of the market because it's the reality of our scaling imperative. We are volume constrained as a company. There's a lot more demand for our material and a lot more demand for our food initially than we have the capacity to supply. So as we scale up, we go after the highest value density applications. So we're going to create luxury leather goods. In the food category, we're going to have lots of private invitation-only tastings with chefs that will proceed over the course of the next several years. And then when we're good and ready, and we go through the right approval processes, then we can introduce this into the restaurant market, and we can introduce this into the grocery market as well.
Great. So continuing this theme, Ken, of scale, one of the ways that companies that have ingredients in a number of, or a platform that has an application in a number of different sectors really get to commercial scale is to partner. And you have some significant partnerships across those sectors. And I wonder if you could share with us just the approach that Solazyme has taken in partnering, in maximizing the value of the technology in a number of sectors, and what we can expect for the future, obviously without naming names, but what the overall approach is.
I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges is on the food ingredient side, it's incredibly expensive. There are very few ingredient startups. You can probably think of 4 or 5, and it's because it requires tremendous scale. And so you really only see the big players actually innovating typically. So Solazyme's taken a different approach. We've raised over $500 million with an IPO about 1.5 years ago culminating. But that's only the start of it. And what we've really done to supplement that is to look to partnerships, both in the downstream and the upstream. And so on the manufacturing side of it, we have publicly announced partnerships with Bunge for a joint venture in Brazil. Of course, this helps provide feedstock at affordable costs, and it provides their manufacturing expertise in a local economy where our feedstock's at. We just recently announced our first commercial production with a partnership at ADM. So ADM is, again, another one of the big partners, and they've leveraged our technology together, and we've commercialized our first product. Very exciting, actually. First tons coming off the line on that product. But we've also done it on the other side of the equation. We've done it on the commercial side. And we've self-funded a couple products. I shared a few. But part of the challenge with the technology is we could honestly go anywhere with the technology. We could create almost any oil in the world and almost any protein in the world. And the best way to do that is ask partners where to innovate and where they need the most help. There's not a lot of nutritious, effective ingredients out there. Most of the cheapest ingredients are not that healthy, actually. And so publicly announced, Unilever is a significant partner. And they help us on multiple levels. They help us figure out a tailored profile. They help us with some of the capital that's required. And they help us actually bring some of these products to market. We're not relying on those partners totally. We are, of course, working with those small and medium companies to help gain acceptance. But partners have just been a critical aspect. And we couldn't have gotten the technology to where it is without those partners.
So Brent, similar question to you, how you're thinking about the timing of partnerships, the types of partners that you see really getting you through some of the scale challenges that we've talked about and have been identified.
Yeah, at Beyond Meat, I think what we find most alluring about partnerships is really distribution. I think a lot of food entrepreneurs and beverage entrepreneurs really hit their big moments when they are able to share the same trucks as Pepsi, Kraft, et cetera. And so as a case studies, we really look towards silk specifically, and its acceptance within the American diet and use really didn't have a huge break until they shared the same truck as Dean Foods, one of the largest dairy companies in the United States. So I think that's what we find most exciting in the long term. As to timing and sequence, I think getting in too early with a lot of the larger food companies could really be risky because ultimately your incentives are not properly aligned. And for us too, it's really about intellectual property protection as well.
So I want to bring in the consumer element to this, and there's a lot we could talk about on the scale-up challenges, and there's a lot we can talk about on the consumer side. And I said at the outset that one of the drivers around a decision to purchase a product is obviously cost. And I'm wondering, as you think about launching a product into the food market, having launched a food product into the market, and selling ingredients, how you're each thinking about cost, and are these solutions that consumers can afford? And if so, which consumers are we talking about? Why don't you start?
Yeah. So for us, there's 3 things I obsess about as we tech transfer out of pure R&D and into process development, pilot production, and commercial scale up. I obsess about making sure that we have the right quality of end product, and that's my first obsession. I want to make sure the leather we create is of the highest quality, that the food products we create are absolutely delicious and appealing. And I also obsess about scalability and cost. And those 3 things really have to work in order for us to be the success that we believe we can be. The cost equation for us is going to be something that we're going to navigate over the course of the next few years. So right now, if I were to tell you what the square meter cost is of the leather that we produce in the lab right now at our research scale right now, it's quite expensive. It comes out to probably on the order of tens of thousands of dollars per square meter. There's a very small market for leather goods that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now, interestingly enough, there is a market for that, but it's a small market. But what's interesting is that as we transfer our technology from pure R&D into pilot production and commercial scale up, we've already modeled out cost improvement programs that take our costs down by 2 orders of magnitude. And we're not being overambitious in this. We're looking at industry best practices. We're starting to implement them. And the funny thing is, in implementing these best practices, we actually find that in some ways, our cost improvements exceed industry best practices. And the reason why is because best practices are based on medical processes that have to adhere to FDA compliance, what is called CGMP, clinical good medical practice. We are not so limited by CGMP. We can actually adhere to good laboratory practice and do whatever it is that works well. And as a result, our cost improvement programs beat our projections so far. And so we're able to take down, by the time we get to pilot production, our costs are already going to be an order of magnitude better. Now, that's still not a material that's going to be cost advantageous, but already at that point, we can produce enough of it where we can start introducing little demonstration applications. But by the time we get to commercial production, we've modeled it out that we get to a cost competitive position with traditional leather at the high end of the leather range. So we're going to be cost competitive with exotic and premium leathers. Now, the same thing applies to food. Right now, each little meat, steak chip that we produce, factoring in the time of our PhDs and all the materials that we use and everything, probably costs on the order of $100. Now, there's a very limited market, again, for a bag of potato chips that costs thousands of dollars. But it's
probably outside of Frito-Lay's
right.
market.
But it's an R&D project. And again, once we're ready to transfer this out of pure R&D, it comes down to very quickly less than $1 and pennies. And we've modeled that out as well. Now, we have to decide, of course, if as a company we want to commercialize this specific product. And that's the first decision that we really need to make. We're developing a whole bunch of other things as well. But in food, like in leather, we're going to aim at the high end of the market first, initially be a limited kind of molecular gastronomy style food item, work with chefs to make it a novelty, a very desirable food product, and then scale from there as our cost improves.
Well, what kind of timeline would you be talking about to get that commercial scale that you'd see it in convenience stores and not just for the
Right.
top 2%?
So I can tell you about leather, because that's the first thing we're commercializing. So with leather, we're looking to start introducing demonstration applications, limited production run products within the next couple of years or so. So 2015, 2016, right now we're working with our commercial partners to come up with limited production runs of luxury fashion items that we can then supply on an on-demand basis, kind of bespoke basis afterwards, and then scale from there. And then based on the success of that, we would work again with partners to develop a commercial production capacity, and that would happen probably after 2016. So the scale-up would be kind of 2016, 2017 for the scale-up of leather. Now for food, it's a bigger question because we have to, as a small company, you kind of have to, focus on one challenge at a time. So we're continuing to develop the technology around food, but it's a sequencing challenge. For us, I think we're going to be in these invitation-only tasting events for the next several years. And then it really depends on, we have to go through an FDA process. We have to decide where in the world we commercialize first. Do we want to commercialize in the United States? Possibly. Do we want to commercialize in Asia, where the supply-demand imbalance is even greater for animal protein, and where we could also aim at the high end of the market? So there's a lot of kind of business questions we need to sort out. But I would say, provided everything is a go, we could start scaling really within, it's only gated by the regulatory process, because you don't want to scale until you actually have, you'll supply kind of at the pilot scale to make sure you can kind of go through the regulatory process, but then scale after that. So I would say probably within the next 5 to 10 years. And it wouldn't surprise me that in 10 years' time, this food product would be available in grocery stores.
And what's the biggest challenge with that scalability, do you think, or foresee? Just sort of, if I wanted to create rules and rules of leather, Would it look like that, or would it be like a
So
little dish?
let's actually hold that question on leather and go back to meat, or beyond meat in that case, and we'll come back to it. And talk a little bit about pricing in the market that you're in. So I was in the grocery store and picked up a package of actually the seasoned chicken strips, which were, I believe, $5.29, which I think is less than the organic chicken that I would otherwise buy. And you really articulated a global vision for rolling out a meat replicate, if you will. And can you talk about what some of the external factors are and what's driving your pricing strategy and how external changes might affect that?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So I think I will add almost one caveat. It was like my business partner, Ethan, and I, when we first got the business going, we were so myopically focused on, oh, look how great the texture is, and we tried to roll out our products totally plain at a very aggressive price. But ultimately, most consumers, I think we all really are very much so focused on taste. If it doesn't taste good, you're not going to buy it. And a lot of the market share loss in soy milk has been taken over by almond milk and coconut milk because people just like the taste better. It doesn't bring any protein. So I think for us as a company, we've launched our products. We're in over 1,000 retail grocery stores today. We'll be in nearly 5,000 by the end of the year. And we're merchandised at about $7 to $10 per pound, which is very aggressive to both conventional cooked chicken and very much so aggressively priced versus natural, antibiotic-free, organic cooked chicken. And when we consider the global context of where we'd like to be, the big drivers is really in plant protein. The challenges of sourcing plant protein cost efficiently is extremely difficult, and all proteins bring different functional characteristics. So we love to unlock the entire plant kingdom. And Tim Geislinger in the back there, Tim, raise your hand. He's focused on that for us and really thinking about all the different plant sources that we can. So I think that's how we break the pricing mold and really hope to break the market. Yeah.
So question for you, Rob. As you look across this intersection of agriculture and technology and food, what are some of the most exciting things that you're seeing? We've heard really exciting stories today. What are some of the things that are emerging in kind of the seed stage? What's exciting you?
I mean, very much. I think it's really on the stage right now, for particularly in food tech. Hampton Creek being absent from this panel, we've spoken with before as well. The professor in the Netherlands doing the stem cell burgers. I think this is really clearly the cutting edge, and so there's not.
I don't think that's the marketing name for it, but
stem cell burger. You don't think that's good? I shouldn't be in branding then.
lab burger.
The mixed stem cell.
That's right.
So I think as far as the food tech space, I think we're in very good company right now. And then I'll just sort of briefly speak about the ag tech space in general, and what we're seeing is massive abilities to bring efficiencies and sustainability to the market. So there's water conservation. I mean, water's a big deal in California, as you guys probably have been hearing lately, and that's really affecting the market. So a better use of the resources that we do have. If we're talking about pesticides, there's much more biodegradable approaches now, and so. But that said, there's a movement right now for organic food, and there's a technology movement, and sometimes these are going hand in hand, and sometimes. In the case of sort of Monsanto, the GMO stuff, there's these things are sort of bumping together in an ugly way, and so I'm interested to see how this plays out with, for instance, just a quick show of hands. If I gave you a pair of leather gloves that were made in a petri dish, how many people would feel weird that being on their skin? I personally would, but that's just a psychological thing I'll probably need to get over, because I
Actually,
know.
just out of curiosity, let's answer that question. So if you had a chance to wear cultured leather that was slaughter-free, would you buy a handbag or would you buy a pair of shoes? How many people would be into that?
Touching your skin.
Touching your skin. Great. How many people would be absolutely positively freaked out by the idea of leather that is grown, not slaughtered. Okay, there you go. That's not bad. I'll go after that market share as a business.
So good. But I do think there's going to be, it's going to take a while for people to get comfortable with technology intersecting with food. And these guys, I think, are running a nice line down that right now.
So this actually brings up another kind of consumer demand and topic that I wanted to talk about in terms of transparency. And I'll start with Ken on the Solazyme side with respect to the products that you sell directly to consumers in the personal care space. And what kind of transparency are consumers wanting? And then I'll extend the question to Beyond Meat. And how do you educate them and be transparent and authentic about what processes and what science is used in the products? And it is an advantage or is it a disadvantage?
I think people are scared of technology and food. Generally, when you hear technology, there's some archaic things in the past that have kind of led to this general view about technology and food. And I think that's what we have to break through. Because today, actually, I think technology can make healthier, more sustainable foods than actually some of the transparent sources. If you actually knew how your ingredients were processed today and how they ended up in your final finished foods, you become very much an advocate of many of the things on this stage. But I will share one avenue, and this is probably an early kind of view of food. And so for all of you that go to very expensive skin treatments, here's an alternative Here's an alternative. So in this case, it's really amazing. What we've done is take the polysaccharide out of the algae cell. So the algae naturally protect themselves from the sun. It's a certain polysaccharide that enables that. We've extracted that polysaccharide. It's a very small additive inside this. And when you apply it to the skin, it's regenerative. It's pretty amazing, actually. Go out and around and get it. It's at Sephora and QVC, but actually, all kidding aside, what this has done for us is, we introduced this ingredient partly because we wanted consumers to start to accept algae. And 3 years ago, if you asked people if they were interested in algae in cosmetics or personal care or soaps, the answer would have probably been not really. And now I can tell you that there is a whole host of emerging applications in the personal care field that are looking towards algae and seaweed and other emerging pieces. So 3 years ago, that little kind of adventure, regardless of the fact that it's actually become a successful product, has enabled that. And that's kind of what we plan to do with food. And that's kind of what we hope some of our colleagues can do with food.
So Brent, I'm going to ask you to speak to the issue of transparency and what consumers demanding. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up with a fundraising question for everyone to answer in terms of what advice you can have for entrepreneurs who are fundraising. But first tackle the issue of transparency on the consumer side.
Yeah, fortunately, most of our consumers don't really grapple with how is this made, because our products are merchandised in the retail grocery set in the existing category that already exists and consumers are already familiar with. Typically, most of our consumers have a lot of questions about, is this GMO, is this soy? Those are probably the most substantial questions. Recently, when Foster Farms had their outbreak of foodborne illness, we had issued a transparency challenge to all the biggest chicken companies in the United States and saying, we'll open our plant doors if you open yours. So obviously none of them reciprocated, but our door is still open there in Columbia, Missouri. You could visit our plant and take a tour there. It does smell like chicken, and so I think for us, it's again always about delivering the positive consumer experience and taste. I think generally that consumers have very short-term memories when it comes to foodborne illnesses. We still eat spinach. You see salads and other things, and so we know it brings risks. And I eat chicken, and I know that could bring risks as well, but we keep doing it. So we're very much so focused on just fantastic experience and a product that people can feel good about.
I should say proudly that we both have companies based in Columbia, Missouri.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we share the same university.
We're both University of Missouri
Yeah.
spinouts.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. So let's turn to the topic of fundraising. We've talked a bit about the capital intensity of this industry And we saw Hampton Creek raise $23 million yesterday, brings their grand total to about $30 million raised in 2.5 years. The companies represented here have all raised varying amounts of venture capital from prominent sources. And maybe we can just go down the line and share some war stories in terms of what really moved the needle, what accelerated the process, what grabbed investors, and share some advice with entrepreneurs in the crowd in terms of navigating the fundraising landscape.
Sure. So we're the earliest stage company on this stage, and we're funded by a combination of seed investors that are both individuals and funds, venture funds, as well as grants. And we've been very successful and lucky so far that every single grant that we have applied for, we have won, which was not my experience with Organovo. There we had about a 50% success rate. But with Modern Meadow, the 4 grants that we've applied to so far, we've gotten each one, so we're 4 for 4. And we just actually heard last week that we won an NSF, a National Science Foundation's SBIR grant that could bring us another $1.25 million. So that's absolutely terrific, because the best kind of funding for a company is grant funding that is non-dilutive. It has, of course, some administrative challenges. You've got to write a grant application. It's a big process. This NSF grant that we applied for, we submitted a 99-page package for it. And then there's a lot of administration kind of following up on that. But it's $1.25 million where we don't have to kind of give away stock or dilute our ownership. So far, every single dollar that we've raised from private investors, we've been able to match it with $1 of grant funding. And our supporters include, on the grant side, actually, Peter Thiel. He was one of our early grant funders. We have a grant from Breakout Labs, which is his philanthropic venture to support kind of breakthrough science. We also have a couple SBIRs, one from the US Department of Agriculture, 2 now from the US, from the National Science Foundation. We have, on the private investment side, we've got venture funds like Artis Ventures, and Sequoia is an investor, and Milestone Ventures is an investor. And then we've got individuals who are very value-added and really like to kind of get in and help us and make connections for the company. And we found that combination works really well. So far, we're very capital efficient. We still have over $2 million, or almost $3 million in the bank. So we've been running a very lean operation. And that, for us, has worked well, because we want to make sure that we develop the technology, we figure out what the right end product is, and then when we're ready to scale, then it becomes kind of more capital intense, and then we'll be raising more money. So our plan is later on this year to raise an A round, and for that, we'll be going to institutional funding sources.
Great.
So beyond me, we've really been fortunate enough to attract some fantastic investors in biz and ev that from Twitter, from Kleiner Perkins to Bill Gates, the Humane Society, to the founder of Honesty, Seth Goldman, amongst many others. And I think I'll caveat to say, if you're an entrepreneur looking to start something within the food and bev category, don't take capital if you don't have to. I think for us, it necessitated it with our intellectual property, the capital intensivity in which we produce our products. So I'll say that. And in general, I think for us, it was about the big vision of the meat market itself. It's $180 billion in consumer spend in the United States alone. It suffers from environmental issues, health issues, et cetera, as delineated earlier in the presentation. And so for investors, they see that, and they see that the world today is really, it's like a parallel world. In the United States, in Europe, or North America, Europe, meat consumption is declining rapidly. In emerging markets, China, India, and what I consider to be the sleeping giant of meat consumption of sub-Saharan Africa, it's a huge problem, and we know that we have to deal with it. So we feel that we're kind of at the intersection of those. But ultimately, I think the thing that sold most investors the most was delivering taste and texture in a scalable format. And so I kind of always go back to that. And so I love the food industry because everything's tangible, so that's it.
So Rob, I'm going to skip over to you and ask you to talk a little bit about the changing face of the investors that you work with. Already we've heard kind of a diversity of Humane Society, Bill Gates, angel investors from Twitter and Yahoo, and traditional VCs. Who are the players that you're working with, and what's exciting to them? What's bringing them to the table?
So we work with a lot of institutional investors who have different motives. So some are family offices. They are great sympathetic investors. They're the type of investors to get behind an opportunity that has some sort of social impact, some kind of meaningful impact. So just as a note, if you are raising capital, you do want to identify what kind of company you are, and then sort of target those kinds of investors. We are seeing a lot of sustainability funds coming into the market. We're reaching out to so just as a note, there's a lot of new capital coming in just to agribusiness itself. So if you look at BlackRock, they have an agribusiness fund that's only 3 years old, even though agriculture is one of these ancient industries, and one of the biggest investment companies just is getting started with this. So there's a whole bunch of new money coming into the space, and one of the things is that this asset class has been difficult to access for almost all investors. So you could invest in commodities, but it was really difficult to get direct access to the companies. And so again, as I mentioned before, we've got a VC interest. But then as well, if you're also looking for capital, I would also strongly urge you to look for grant money, because there's grant money at the USDA, there's grant money at the NSF, and again, if you're working with food and you're solving a problem, there's a lot of sympathetic investors out there, and proof is a bit in the pudding, because if you can create a product, I think Solinet is a good example. People got passionate about it and could buy into that. So having that ability to taste something, to see it, to touch it, that leather, and people say, I get it. It's much more tangible.
We have time for one more. So I guess, it's interesting, we've talked about the convergence of biotech in the food space, and I wonder if you can offer some thoughts, maybe as a last quick comment down the line, to entrepreneurs that are interested in biotech but not scientists, and want to take a technology-driven route into this industry but don't come at it from a science standpoint. Not as applicable to you, since you've been both in the life science and the food space, but given that perspective, what advice do you offer to the non-scientist?
I would imagine it takes a combination of skills and experiences to really make a successful team. So a really good founding team is made up of people who have different spikes, but who can integrate well, who have complementary spikes. And what's been fortunate about Organovo is that I remember we went through about at least half a year of these Sunday night kind of book club phone calls where we were talking about, like, there's this great technology, what could we do with it? Before we actually decided to form the company. And on those calls, we brought in the people who could always bring in complementary skills. We had a friend of mine who was my smartest colleague at McKinsey at the time. We had another friend of mine who was an 11-year veteran of Amgen, who's now the founding CEO of the company, and he's been really instrumental in driving its success. We had an IP lawyer as well, who could kind of help us navigate through some of the IP questions early on. And it's that complementary skill set. So if you are not the technologist, then the very best thing you can do if you're looking to create a technology-based business is to find that complement, to find those technologists, and you can be the translator, you can be the business side of the equation, and that's the function I serve. So I can speak technology, but I'm not a scientist. The last biology course that I took was in college, But I serve an important function within the team because if you don't have the business side, you're then a technology looking for the right problem to solve, right? And there's a lot of those businesses where it's great technology, but it's not quite positioned properly, doesn't quite know what the right problem is to solve. So really key is to assemble that complementary team and find people that have that have a skill set that is different from yours.
Brent, do you want to add anything from your co-founding experience with Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I hated chemistry and biology when I was in school, and I was generally confused by it a lot of times. But I think for Ethan and I, we knew that we just had found just an awesome product at the University of Missouri, and we knew how we could take this cooking technology and scale it, and to really find the right partners who could do that. We felt it was in Kleiner Perkins and Gates' team, et cetera, who really knew their stuff. And so the company's really focus on intellectual property has been tremendously strengthened by those partners.
Right.
Yeah,
Ken, we were talking earlier.
Yeah, I was going to
you
say,
have an interesting
I'm
route
actually not,
to this space.
not a. I mean, I was right at that point actually when it's a technology company. We're mostly a team of scientists on our way to commercialization, and I was one of the early hires in my division to help commercialize it. And my experience has been, and being inside the industry, is there's actually a ton of technologies waiting to be developed and a ton of really interesting areas. The universities are ripe with them, and there's not enough talent to actually commercialize them. So I'd actually would suggest that it's just a matter of kind of scoping out and finding those avenues. And if you have a will, there's a way. And I truly believe that. I mean, I just know dozens of technology who just don't know how to create a value proposition and actually an economic benefit that consumers will buy. So I'd actually put the problem, it depends who you talk to. A lot of people I talk to tell me, I just don't know how to commercialize my technology. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity.
So for the person out in the audience that sent that question, thank you, and you should feel inspired, and you should also feel hopeful that there is an investment community out there hoping to back you,
But I
the
would
next
say
big
very
idea.
importantly, start with a really good understanding of the unmet need.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because what's really important is really understanding the market you want to go after, assembling the right team that can iterate and solve against that unmet need, and the actual specific technology that you're developing. That's almost the least important thing, because you can always keep on iterating on that, and you can kind of figure out, if you know what the unmet need is you're trying to solve and you've got a really, really smart team, you can actually tweak that product or that technology to make it work.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point. I had spent an exorbitant amount of time pouring through all the licensable technologies at all the agri-food related universities, both domestically and globally. And in the University of Missouri's case, it was exactly that. They had toiled with it for so long, and they just needed someone to take it forward. So I agree. I mean, I think there's tons of opportunity.
They need to call Rob.
It's such a great story, because the scientists behind this technology had been working on it for like over a decade.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah,
and just did not get a lot of support from the university, and it was just kind of a labor of love. Right?
Well, at the University of Missouri, they have a meat market there, and they love their meat.
And that's just the dating scene,
Columbia.
you know?
So he was really he was a real trailblazer. So it's awesome to see that they'd born these two companies for sure.
Well, I think the lights are going to dim, the orchestra is going to play. I suspect that we'll still keep talking, because we have a terrific panel and a great group of passionate pioneers. And I want to thank all of you and all of you.